Okay, so.
So, good evening, everyone. I'm Councillor Dogan. I'm the chair of the Audit Committee. Please note that this meeting is recorded by the councils for live and subsequent broadcast via the council's internet site. Officers will introduce themselves when speaking. Any apologies for absence?
Chair, we've had apologies from Councillor Ovats and Rena Deeper, an independent member.
Thank you, Naz. Any urgent business?
No items of urgent business registered.
Declaration of interest? Any declaration of interest? No? Thank you. Any definitions? Yes, please. Come in.
Hello, Chair. Thank you very much. I just wanted to remind the committee that members must attend in person if they are to take part in the meeting as part of the committee. But with the consent of the chair, as you know, Councillor Dogan, any member who attends remotely may contribute to the debate, but not vote as a member of the committee.
That's noted. Thank you.
Yes, Chair, I should note Councillor Caldwell is actually online. He appears to have joined us online. So, yeah, Councillor Caldwell. He wants to say anything. He has to listen.
Elbridge, do you want to say anything? That's right. We'll move on. So there's notifications, minutes from the last meeting. Everybody has a chance to look at the minutes if they are accurate record. Yeah. Okay. So minutes are agreed. Thanks so much. So item 7. Management and property improvement plan update. Can I now invite officers to introduce the report? Lead officer Jonathan Kirby.
Great. Thank you, Chair. Jonathan Kirby, Assistant Director for Capital Projects and Property. My colleague with me, Amanda.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Amanda Groves. I'm Head of Strategic Asset Management and
So the paper we've got this evening, just highlighting some of the key points that we've got within it. I think, like many local authorities, apparently has faced challenges with its property portfolio and its management of property. I think that's a common theme across a lot of local authorities over probably the past 20 years. Improvements started in this area following an audit back in 2019-20. Which highlighted some areas of improvement around governance, etc., that were needed. And that probably started the journey that led through to actually rebuilding back up a property function within the council, which had been significantly run down, probably leading up to the HDB not being taken forward in terms of how people develop. The 3 areas, just under section 2.2, that we were really focusing on was around people and resources, governance, and then best practice in terms of policies and processes. That culminated in an asset strategy that was produced probably for the first time in a number of years, that was taken through in 2020 through to Cabinet. What we've done is build upon that as a kind of solid base, and we produced the Strategic Asset Management and Property Improvement Plan, which went through to Cabinet last April. We did attend the previous incarnation of the meeting a few weeks prior to that Cabinet report going, and we gave the full commitment in that Cabinet report that we would come back so that we can have input from the committee before we go back with an annual update, which will be on the forward plan in June. So, as you'll see in the kind of recommendations to the committee, very much welcome those comments so that can help influence the action plans. That's probably one of the key areas of difference in the Strategic Asset Management Plan, in that it picked up the 48 recommendations that we had from internal audits, because we had achieved the nil assurance in terms of property, which wasn't a surprise, and actually David Joyce, as director, and myself had requested for that audit to take place when we first joined, so it could actually give us that kind of roadmap that we needed to develop. And you'll see we reflected those along with the recommendations from the independent external audit into 10 action plans. Not proposing to go through the 10 action plans that were part of the sandpit, but for ease, on page, I think it's 71 of the pack, it might be labelled as 75 within the PDF. What we tried to do is break down for the committee those action plans, which each reflects one of the 10 objectives that were agreed by Cabinet, and we've shown the year 1 progress. And largely, because obviously there are quite a large number of areas of it, what we were proposing was to focus upon 4 of the areas. Of course, the committee is welcome to question all of them, which was around the property review process, which is the kind of flow chart that you see in the main report that we've got in there. And that's how we'll get an open and transparent assessment and baseline of our sites. The wider governance proposals and changes that we've been able to make and implement. And then around any of the kind of wider staffing, resourcing, also with the commercial property portfolio as well. So just underneath the recommendation, those were the kind of 4 areas that we probably pulled out that we thought would be worth kind of focusing on in terms of those areas of improvement. So that's our introduction. Happy to questions, Chair.
I just a question from the members. Councillor Rossetti.
So first of all, thank you for the report. I think it's a very complex report, so I just follow the guidelines here and try to concentrate on the governance side, so the property governance structure and the performance metrics. And I must say, I'm sorry, but I really couldn't understand it, because there is mention of a governance structure, but I cannot see the description. I'm looking at section 3.5 to 3.7.
Yep.
There is the structure in this diagram, but I can see a lot of bodies and entities. It's not clear to me how they relate to each other, what each one of them does. So probably, maybe there is a description that would be helpful to understand what is the governance.
Yeah.
And because you were mentioning that some changes have been made, and I couldn't find it in the document what was before, what is now, so it's difficult for me to say if the governance has improved or not. On all this table, there is a reference to the corporate committee, which I mean, obviously now this is the audit committee, so probably those were lifted from another old document and not been updated. And I have similar doubts about the property review process, because it's always referenced to, but it's never described. So I can see this, for instance, in page 25,
yeah,
with the arrow. I'm familiar with the red, amber, and green, but I really don't understand what is the process. And again, it's always referenced in the document, but it's never explained what exactly is. So it gets difficult for me to understand effectively what governance I should be looking at, or improve in terms of performance metrics. And there is on page 45, again, it's another property governance structure. There is a mention of some groups reporting to the property compliance board, but I didn't find the property compliance board on this structure, it's page 45.
Yeah.
And again, there is reference to the corporate committee. So I don't know, maybe something.
I can answer some of that. That's fine. Yeah. So within the body of the report, you're quite right. I think it was under sections 3.5, 3.6, where we had the governance charts. We've actually taken those from the strategic asset management plan, which we attached as one of the appendices. And that gives some further detail within the Appendix 1 Strategic Asset Management Plan, page 45, I think it is on the pack, but it'll come up as 49 in the PDF.
Okay, so they're not including.
So they're on one of the appendices within the Strategic Asset Management Plan.
Yeah,
So 8.
They're not being printed as that. I mean, I didn't use the PDF and keep
Could you identify the page number for the?
Yeah, so in the page number of the pack, I believe it's page 45.
Yeah.
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 And we've got the property governance structure, which we also referenced within the body of the report.
Yes.
Yeah. And then within there, we should have, in terms of the structure charts, 8.2, where it talks around governance.
Yes.
And we'll talk around then with the improvements that came in. So some of the boards that came in terms of the 2 of them that you'll see in the structure are the Capital Property Board, which is CPB within the structure chart.
Yeah, I reviewed this section,
Yeah.
and again, this is when I said, governance surrounding property decision was reviewed, governance arrangement, but I don't see a description. So perhaps it's just me. I see this table with a lot of bodies, but
We can.
as I said, the property compliance board, I couldn't find it in this table. So I understand it oversees the property compliance, not clear how, who fits into what, and so it's not.
So I think we can definitely take an action to share the terms of reference of those boards, so that you can see them in terms of the officer boards that we have and where they've been brought in. What we have in the report and the action plan is that all property related decisions before they come through for any cabinet recommendation have to go through that CPSG and that CPB board, which is the middle part of that structure. That was part of what was implemented in 2020, was for those 2 boards that all property related decisions had to go through.
Yeah, I was thinking like one page of description of the
Yeah.
governance and one
Bring them
page
in,
of
yeah.
description of the,
Yeah.
of the process.
And we can do that.
And also in the, sorry, I just finished, in those tables for the Audit Improvement Action Plan, there is one column which is the target delivery date on the heading, but then on each table you have the lead officer and the cabinet member, but there is no target delivery date, so either if the way it was printed it was out, or somehow the column stretching.
Yeah, you're correct. That got highlighted through at the cabinet meeting as well. So we put the same paper through, but when it converted to the PDF, it changed it over. But when we're going back in June, we've been able to sort that. Yeah, so we have that. The important part from the reports that we put in is that we identified a lot of dates around year 1, because that's what we obviously could identify. We had to go on a lot of kind of fact finding and identification in terms of what we have in the systems. The years 2 to 5 is what we'll now be bringing to cabinet in June. So kind of what we now think is going to take that time. It's important to highlight that it's quite a big ship to turn around in terms of where we were starting from to here. And that was a key point when we took the original cabinet paper through, that this was a 5-year programme that we would be doing, with year 1 probably being a lot of baseline data, fact finding. We'll obviously have made improvements, hopefully, that we've highlighted in the tables, but we're also still unearthing things that we need to address.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the report. I thought it was set out really well, and I thought that it was great that you had the objectives in place. But loose ends that I'm not quite sure about. So, and I'm sorry, there are a few. If I could just walk through the report, that would be really helpful. So, I suppose one of the first things was how we the values that you are addressing when you talk about kind of, the Harrogate plan and the values. So I'm not going to ask you about that now, but I'm going to refer back to that, because one of the problems that I know exists in the borough is the underuse of some buildings and the lack of property or lack of use of community space in other parts of the borough. So the part of the borough that I'm in, Pounds Green, we have a very mixed population. One half of the population is reasonably well off, the owner-occupiers, etc., and the other half of the population, probably more than half, are private rented, insecure tenancies, etc. But we have no community space in the whole of our area, and it's something that I've gone on and on and on and on about. But I think probably we're not the only area that doesn't have any community space, which prevents people from getting the kind of grassroots, easy support that they might get, prevents people from having things like a social place to meet. or people to support each other when they've got Alzheimer's, etc., etc. So that's in my head as I'm reading it, and I just wanted to share that with you because it gives you a backdrop to where I'm coming from. So if we just start off quickly on the beginning, there's a couple of questions I had right from the start. I think that the 5-year plan, I acknowledge and accept, of course, that you've had a huge job to do, and I think setting it out in the way you have is very helpful. If we go to page 22, and we're looking at a robust, halfway down that first paragraph, maintenance or efficiency savings, improve the utilisation of buildings with co-location, meanwhile uses of empty property. I must admit I haven't read every line, but I have read the whole document, and I didn't see anywhere where you were talking about meanwhile use or co-location. And both of those are quite difficult to achieve, but we know that there are community buildings which are very underused, and yet, I'm part of the Boundary Food Bank, and we have nowhere to store food, nowhere to go to, we can't run workshops for anybody who comes, etc., because we have no space. And yet we know that there are empty spaces that council owns 5 minutes walk away, but we're not allowed in them. So there's not the greatest. So I wanted to ask you about that. And then I wanted to ask you about, are you talking about all community buildings when you're talking about corporate property model? And I wanted to ask you how you are going to make sure that properties which have become not fit for purpose, because what's happened in Haringey is we've obviously had properties which at that time were great, and then they become not fit for purpose. And so how we make sure that we have an ongoing system where the use of properties can change over time, and that can be acknowledged as something that happens. Where we've got Haringey Deal to involve community in decisions about council buildings, still on 3.3, that is something that I think Haringey struggled a lot with, and that co-production element or consultation element, or whatever you want to call it, so that people feel really alienated when they're promised something and don't get it. So I just wanted to make sure that when we're talking in here, and you talk a lot about communities and community involvement, that we're talking about real community involvement and how that happens, and a bit more about how you're going to do that. The strategic, 3.7, the Strategic Asset Management and Property Steering Group, I just wanted to ask who that was and who was involved with that, and would the working group take evidence, and if they did, who from, and the working group is 3.11. Will the minutes of that group be publicly available? So how do we know, how do our ordinary members of the public know what's happening, what's going on? I mean, there's quite a bit more, and I feel a bit loath to continue talking because I'm taking a lot of space here. But the other thing, just let me finish this bit, and then I'm going to pass it over. And if after the discussion there isn't answers to the questions I've got, I can post them or send them to you. But on page 9, I wanted to ask about, you talked about revenue in 6.2. What about service charges, and whether service charges are consistent across the properties and who they're paid by? Because when you've got multi-use properties, there's obviously a huge issue about service charges. And also ownership of the estate. So Haringey's got freehold and the upkeep of the property, that's costly, and how that's factored into service charges. And then in 6.10, you've got the objectives are designed to reduce existing inequalities. I'd just like a bit more detail about that in the public sector equality duty, because it's quite easy to trip off the tongue, but much more difficult to put into practice. And I think that we as a council struggle sometimes to put that into practice, particularly about the equalities around social justice, poverty and those issues. That the articulate middle classes do tend to have their voices heard. Even when a council that really wants to hear everybody's voice, it still finds it difficult to make sure people's voices are heard. So I'll just leave it at those things. And I have to say, I'm sorry for being so nitty, quickly, but I do appreciate you've done a huge amount of work, and I appreciate the work that you're doing. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm a bit lost in the question. There's so much.
I know.
If you could just be like concise with the questions, so we can actually get the responses. But are you okay? You okay with?
I think we've got them, and I think if I don't answer them, steer me. And
Yeah, I
that's
think
fine.
we've had them
That's
on the
fine.
report,
Yeah.
just went through, yeah.
So I think the heart of the actual asset management plan we put in was that property. Yeah, we can only deliver great services for our residents if we've got an asset base, a property base. So that is absolutely our focus. The property performance matrix that we referenced on page 25 of the pack, page 7 of the report, which is just under sections 3.11. What that's about is actually identifying, working with service areas. There's 3 areas to it, and Amanda will be able to touch on it in a moment because we've been doing a lot of work with all the service areas. That assessment takes place from usage information that we have from services. It takes place in terms of condition information on a building, and it also looks at the strategic needs you were referring to in terms of the council's corporate plan. So what hopefully that allows us to do is map and look at things that might say, actually, we do have a deficit within a particular area based on the needs of what a service would say. So again, Amanda will be able to come in, but if we've been working with adult services or children's services, and they have their plan that says we have a real need in this area for delivery, but actually we have no facilities in which to do it, and we require one. What that does through this model of assessment is it would highlight to us that there is an amber or red, there is a need for it. Amanda and the team would then start to look at it in terms of that strategic plan to say, not just from our own asset base, by the way, it would also be from, is it something that we own? Is there something that we might need to purchase? Is there something we might need to lease? But it would identify within that geographical area, we need to make an intervention, we need to work here jointly. I'll come on to some of the community bit in a moment, but I didn't know Matt, if you want to talk a bit about it.
Yeah, sure. So it's been really interesting and feel really privileged actually to work with the services, children's, adults, our fortunate company, and working with the operational areas and going through each of those assets and really drilling down into what their operational need is, not just for now, but in the future. And scoring, going through like an asset performance assessment, which kind of is this kind of workings behind this property review process. But actually, most importantly, working with those services, those individuals. It's not just like the ADs, but the heads of service and also the actual service managers to get behind what they kind of need and want their service area, but also trying to help them in terms of if there might be a crossover, say, between children and adult services. They may want a particular asset or building or requirement in a particular location. So it's kind of joining up those dots and not looking at it in silos. So it's a really interesting piece of work, to be honest, but it's also really valuable to get to the nitty gritty. We're also trying to understand the budget and the makeup of those buildings, and also the staffing in terms of the property staffing, not the operation staffing. Because remember, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is not only make better use of our assets, but make sure that the operational staff can deliver the operation and concentrate on that rather than worrying about a leaky tap or a lift. So it's kind of all of that. We're trying to do all that together, really.
And I think that's where, onto your 2 points about, say, meanwhile use or any sort of activity of sharing buildings, having that corporate property model breaks down those silos to give us that view, and also with the voluntary community sector as well. I was in a meeting with colleagues from that sector only yesterday, where we're looking at the cabinet report coming through next week around community buildings and social value leasing models, which is going to be absolutely co-produced with the community centres as a start within that community portfolio to address that, so we can get into some meanwhile use space, we can get into some hiring of that.
Just a quick question around that, because obviously you're meeting with people who already have those buildings and are already using them and have already got a huge vested interest, even if they're not being used well, to keep them. And that's, I think that's one of the struggles the community has, and the voluntary sector and the residents have, is that you know that there's a centre there that nobody's using, or maybe they have parking lots there every Saturday for Spurs. And yet those people will then be represented in putting forward their view of what they want, and it might be just a tiny use.
It is. I can commit it's going to be wider than that. It is wider than just those that have the leases within our buildings. It's going to be for groups that want access to buildings and need to get into them, because we're very clear that the kind of social leasing model, the social value framework that we're going to be bringing in is going to apply to many sites, and it's more than just those that have leases at the moment. So we are getting the opinions from lots of different groups. I've met with many groups that are actually very keen to get into our buildings, but have not been able to get into our buildings, have not been able to hire them. And that's part of what that review process, that property review process also shows us, because if a building is underutilised, if it's not meeting the objectives of the council, what is there fundamentally to do, they're valuable assets. I don't think that's just in money, valuable in terms of what they provide to the community, then actually we have to be brave and have that conversation with the people that are in them at the moment and see how we can actually look to kind of open up those doors a little bit. I think very much on your qualities one, that's one that I think is where we are looking to address. As you said, it can be easy to roll off the tongue, but hard to put into action. I think through having that information, having the usage information of those sites, seeing the communities that are served, seeing what programs are delivered in those sites, we can actually identify where those gaps are. We can actually start to show that against our in-season multiple deprivation data and say, actually, we're not meeting what we should be meeting. So again, we need to have a conversation about that and see what we can do. So I think that's the kind of flow that does come through. But I appreciate there's a lot of kind of work in process, because the stage we're at the moment is kind of finding out everything of what we've got and who uses them and those bits. The programs that will now start to come during the years 2 and 3, I think we'll be able to address a lot of those and actually give some actual proper metrics that can say, well, usage was at this level and serving these groups, it's now serving more, and we've got a much better use.
Okay, thank you. Councillor.
I thought, if you don't mind following on from Councillor Mason's, it was very, very helpful. I think the new structures were thinking as well. Help. I mean, I think she pointed out the core working together of the communities, which I think is a fundamental point in that, but I don't know if it is coming through at the moment, because I think there's that bit. There's also the role of councillors per se, because it feels to me a very top-down model at the moment. So you've got cabinet, and then you've got corporate audit, but you haven't got a role for all councillors. There isn't a kind of a wider framework for councillors, local councillors from different areas to input into it. And I think that quite good to see a wider role for councillors, because buildings, after all, are in every ward. And if you're not careful, you get the views of about 5 or 6 people myself. And I know very little about Highgate, for example, but it's really important to involve Highgate councillors to have an input into this, because otherwise it's a waste of time. You concentrate only on the views that are coming at you. And so it's not helpful. So I think I don't really, on one level, we always say we're working with communities, the other level we're always doing top down. Really, doesn't help me, I think, really. I don't think it helps.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. On leases, for example, I know we've got a lot of buildings that we're leasing. I mean, I would like to get a proper handle on what we can do with those leases, and whether people have got leases from us. I'd like to understand better about what we can do and what we can't do, because including the maintenance, are they doing the maintenance? Are they making the building safe? Are they making the building? I mean, I'd quite like a little bit more information about it, that opening bit of it. If you don't mind, I know it's a terrible thing to say, but if you don't mind going towards the NRC bit of it, please, only because it's to my heart. Really, the NRC is in Northumberland Park, and obviously it's in my ward.
Yeah.
And we've got quite a few sites actually, and we've got the Area Planning Centre, which I know is going to be refurbished. I think I was a councillor. It was refurbished about 10 years ago by Noel. I don't know if you remember them. They were when they were rebuilding it. So I say, for me, it sort of rates, because I think I've done, a lot of work has been done to that one space, and still more. So it's costly. None of this is cheap. But to go back to the NRC, and I know it's talking about co-working models, but it doesn't really seem to be that even on the ground. I know there are community organisations. I know, for example, our community cook-up, which hasn't got home at the moment, has been moved from the Eric Allen Centre and is desperately looking for space. And I really, I know there's kind of differences between services, and I really don't care too much about those bits of it. But I do care about the kind of services we provide to our visitors. And I want to follow the services that they need rather than the services we have in the building, in the kind of that way. And it feels at the moment they're not part of that. There's other kind of services, local organisations who are not part of that. They're not framework organisations, but they're just people who do odd little services. And I think we don't build on them, and we don't build on them because we don't give them space in our settings. Yeah. And I think I'd quite like to think about how we're going to manage to do that. And at the moment, I get if I raise it, people just don't invite to the meeting. So I think sometimes the services themselves are a barrier to change. Yeah. Really think we. I think that's one.
And Jonathan, and Jonathan, come to those 3 questions that got Councillor Brennan too. So it's become really tough.
Okay.
If you can just be, I understand you're passionate about the community, then I'd emphasise.
Can I just ask one final? Seriously, I don't get any more.
Okay. Just but Jonathan, be concise about the questions, please.
My apologies. Sorry. Sometimes. I
want everyone to have it.
You're very right. You're very right.
It's becoming like conversational approach, which sometimes is the actual question.
And I think Pendarren is the last one. So it's not really, again, we've spent a fortune on Pendarren, and I would like us to make sure we're getting our valuable money back as well. So are we making it usable for children whose parents can't afford to go? And have you got data on that? How is it working? The whole thing. Is it open even? What bits of it is open? I just feel like we often pumping money, but nothing's coming out of it. I worry a little bit about its effectiveness. And again, governance on that, because I would, even with Pendarren, I would like to see local organisations in that part of the world having some input into it, because if anything, they would bring some value to it, I think, So just
so taking the 4 points, so in terms of leases, absolutely we're doing a lease reading exercise at the moment to identify what are all the responsibilities we have under the terms of those leases. We have a digital system that we referenced in the document called Technology Forge. Amanda and the team will be looking to procure over the next year a new system, because that is coming to an end within a year. But what that allows us to do is have that digital approach to be able to monitor what works are taking place, what our responsibilities under the lease are. In terms of the top-down approach you mentioned on the framework with the governance, that very much would feed into any part of with the constitution and decision making that relates to property that we have around that, and that's something that through constitution working group, I think we would take any recommendations as to how that would involve any wider councillors and also community involvement in that, because obviously there's a very specific area under the constitution in terms of how we do decision making. The NRC and Pendarren, we can feedback individually in terms of the projects. In terms of data and performance, again, that is what having going into a digital-based system for us is about, and it starts with that property review process. So we have live data on an annual basis that says about usage, says about user groups and performance, talks about building condition, which links through to what repairs should be done by tenants, and also in terms of long-term future investment. So ultimately, the digitalisation of what is at the moment a huge amount of files and paper, that is going to be absolutely key to that performance for us. So we can bring things like dashboards to you to see that performance.
Okay, thank you. You have to move on, Councillor. You have to move on.
If the constitutional, I can understand, but I still feel there's a role for local councillors. What happens? I mean, do they just get told if you're nowhere near Audit, for example, do they just get told in some way, or do they just get it?
I think the constitutional working group, I mean, that's between joint political parties, and I think that we can also take that on board. See what the role the councils can play in terms of the local and they war with the strategy. We can take that on board. I'd also say that, Jonathan, you and Avery asked that question.
No, no, it's just a
that's-
working group, because that's the whole political decision-making process.
Decision-making process. So, okay, so we'll note that and see how we can actually get the councillors involved. Councillor Brown has given up her questions. I have a question to ask really quickly. So I think one of the main concerns that I had in terms of people and resources, because we have the buildings, we have community centres, but how are we going to ensure that we are supporting the residents, we are supporting those buildings in need and maintained? So what's your people and resources are looking like in order to deliver the strategy?
So we have successfully recruited probably a further 30 individuals since we launched the capital projects and property restructure in 2022. That still only gives us probably up to about 30-35% capacity of the overall structure. It's a very, well, previously it's been a very challenging market. I suspect where we are at the moment with private sector, we may well start to become more attractive in terms of roles within property expertise that will come over to us. But it is challenging. We have very much a lean, thin client model. We have a core number of officers, and then they do have that reliance on interims that come through. So what we're doing within the programme is we very much have a grow our own programme, which we're doing within the team. We have two apprentices who've joined that actually this will be a longer term approach, but obviously we'll have that commitment and actually develop people as they come in. So going through those apprenticeship graduate routes for individuals to come in.
We have an apprenticeship program coming in. I think that's really important, but also locally, and we've got institutions like Cornell, Haringey College. So it was quite nice to actually have that kind of relationship. There's opportunities for people to get into the apprenticeship or internship, and then they can gradually move on through the organisation. That's really important. The issue that you have highlighted, recruitment, is a big issue, and therefore I think there are. We can actually utilise that in a way that we can actually provide opportunities for our residents and younger people in particular to have opportunities to work for the council through apprenticeship or internship programs. Okay, Jonathan, you want to come back or?
The only one I was going to say is we very much, with Canal different groups, we took a different approach to the recruitment for those two apprenticeships. We had over 200 applications. A significant number were local. And that was through going through voluntary networks, the educational establishments, working with our education colleagues and just saying, all your networks, please highlight these jobs and put them out there. And that was by far the largest amount we'd ever had come back with the feedback from HR.
Thank you so much. We're going to have some sort of insight at the future meetings about how that actually develops.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. So to note the recommendation of the SAPIP 23-28 to help inform the next annual update to the cabinet in June 2024, the committee are specially asked to note the comments of the following sections: the corporate property model, the property governance structure, the property performance matrix, and the SAPIP action plans. Okay, if we can just note that. Okay, thanks so much. This is just for noted. Noted. Okay. So the next. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for your comprehensive report, and hopefully the next annual report will be a bit more tidy in terms of understanding charts and the tables and so forth.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Can I just ask one thing?
We finished on this item.
Okay, I just wanted a report back on something. I think I'm entitled to ask that.
So yeah, if it's very quick.
Yeah. So it's the report back about the meanwhile use and the co-location use, and just asking that you, when you've got that, it would be great if you could circulate that information, because I think that's really important.
Okay.
So that's fine.
So that's noted. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you. So the next item on the agenda, can I now invite Officer to introduce a report, which is a procurement audit update. Barry
Phelps.
Phelps. Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Barry.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Barry Phelps. I am the Chief Procurement Officer for the Council.
So Barry will introduce the report.
Yes,
So you just here for observe.
I'm Councillor Collins, I'm Member for Finance, I'm here to support my officer very fast. He's presenting the report. Thank you.
But thank you for being here.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so in terms of the report, I've been asked to provide a couple of updates following previous audits and attendance at the corporate committee. So the updates I've been asked to provide is to provide an indication of the number of quotations that we undertake. So this is where the council goes out the quotation process, and just to remind everybody, that is a 3-quote process for services and goods below 160,000, or for some of the care services and works, it's below 500,000. And within that quotation process, how many of those quotes come back with just generating a single quote or a single tender response? And then the second item was really an update in terms of the new e-procurement solution and where we are in terms of the implementation and whether that could have been brought forward. So I'll address, would you like me to address each one first, pause and then take questions?
If you can just
go through
and then take questions.
Great, okay. In terms of the number of quotations that the council undertakes, there are 2 primary systems that we use. There is the Haringey Procurement Contract Management System, which is generally referred to as the acronym HPCS, and then there is the Dynamic Purchasing System, which is generally referred to as the DPS. They're the 2 main routes that we use for procuring services through the council. In terms of the HPCS system, we generate roughly somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 quotes a year in relation to that system. Unfortunately, that system is unable, without specific development work, to identify how many quotations we got that just returned a single. It is possible for a development to be undertaken, but we've got a new e-procurement solution which is coming online in sort of 8 months' time, 6 to 8 months' time. By the time we schedule that development in with the provider, because it's part of a global system, and then you then start incorporating the costs that are associated with that, it would have extremely very limited use on that. So I'm not able tonight to be able to provide exactly how many single quotes we've got back in terms of those, but I thought it might be helpful for you to understand that generally we put 2,500 to 3,000 quotations through that system a year. In relation to the dynamic purchasing system, that's somewhat different. So we did ask the provider if they would be able to do a development as part of their roadmap going forward, and they were able to accommodate that. So you can see on page 84 of the report, under 6.3, there is a table. And basically, I thought it'd be helpful to give you a bit more detail in relation to some of the quotations, the volume of quotations along those that had a single response. So that table basically outlines the different categories that we procure under through the dynamic purchasing system. And it gives you in one of the columns there the number of quotations and then the number of single responses that we've got. And alongside that, I've also added what that means by way of percentage. And then the final column talks about the average response. So that average response is generally the number of responses that we receive on average within that category. You'll also know that within that there will be some figures which are quite high, and there are contributing factors towards that. So depending upon the dynamics of the category, there are some explanations as to why some of the single quotes are higher. So for instance, you know, if you took sort of semi-independent living, which requires accommodation, sometimes that can be really challenging to be able to find a provider that's got the right accommodation available at that time, you know, particularly in that sector, because it is very challenging in relation to that. And the other thing with something like that is the response time is generally very short, so 2-3 days to be able to find that. Things like the passenger transport. So again, they'll get a lot of ad hoc requests that are for children needing transport immediately. That doesn't really allow us time to run a proper procurement. So generally what would happen, we've already got sort of broader arrangements in place with some of the supply chain, and the service would generally give them a call, see if that transport is available there and then, and then just book it, so they wouldn't generally go out. There are some more explanations which are laid out on page 85, and I'm more than happy to talk through those in a bit more detail if you want. But in terms of the going forward, under the new e-procurement solution, we believe that we will be able to report much more comprehensively within that solution and be able to report exactly on how many times we've got a single quote in response to a tender, whether that's request for quotation or a broader, wider, larger tender process. In terms of the e-procurement solution itself, so we completed the procurement for the new procurement solution in September last year. We had anticipated that we would be able to start implementing that in October. However, we've ended up in some rather protracted contract negotiations with the supplier. We've only recently, in the last couple of weeks, been able to conclude those contract negotiations with them and discussions around finalising the contract. However, we've moved immediately into mobilising the project since that contract, and there was a little bit of operation. So where we are now in terms of the project itself, kind of in that discovery phase and the development and understanding what all the requirements are and helping to design that out. In terms of when we expect the solution to come online, so at the moment we're currently projecting July for the core procurement side and contract management side of the solution. Because it is a complete end-to-end solution, so what I mean by that is source to pay, to be anything when we go out to market, we look to procure, it will then take you through that whole process. It will manage all purchase orders, it will manage the invoicing, it will manage the contract administration so that you can amend the values of the contracts, the term of the contracts. It will do the contract performance as well so that we can monitor the performance of the contractors. So not just at contractor level, but we can look at it, at contract level, we can look at it supply level. We can also introduce corporate KPIs in there so we can have a more global view around that. So there's a lot more functionality, and because this will be a single centralized solution, we will have that oversight of all the procurement activity and contract management across the council, and that will obviously certainly assist me in terms of ensuring that the contractors are performing and doing what they're contracted to do. So the invoice scanning side of it will come on place roughly around about September. There will be some interim arrangements in place that will allow us to continue to pay the contractors during that period. And then in October, we are looking to migrate the current DPS categories onto the solution. And so therefore by October, November, and be operational.
Thank you, Barbara. Members, I've got Councillor Brennan, then I've got Councillor Mason. Brennan.
So I'm just looking at how we get procurement contract system and the DPS. I'm sort of guessing that you're going to correct me, I'm sure, that the dynamic purchasing system might be more related to things that are constantly changing. Or am I inventing that totally? As in the things, the examples that you're giving of that, all things that have to be got immediately. And I wouldn't mind if you could explain what the difference is between the two contract system and procurement systems is. And then I understand that there's 2,500 to 3,000 quotes per year through the Harrogate procurement contract system. But I just feel like it would be really helpful even to have a sort of random sample, so you could just give a sample and say, well, look, well, now this is what it looks like. Most, you know, we do usually get 3 quotes, or we don't ever get 3 quotes. You know what I mean? Just be more reassuring rather than just literally just saying, oh, we can't give you that information for years.
Yeah, sure. So if I deal with the DPS in the first instance and maybe provide a bit more information around that. So the DPS is the dynamic question system is a procedure under the current procurement regulations, and it has particular features which effectively lend themselves to certain categories that we manage more effectively than other routes to market, if you like. So in terms of the dynamic purchasing system, what the dynamic purchasing system does, it allows suppliers, provided that they meet certain accreditation and criteria, to join what's like an open framework, if you like. And so it's really good for SMEs, it's good for being able to develop markets within the framework of the procurement regulations that allow us to more efficiently procure goods and services. How we determine which categories go onto the DPS is through consultation with my team and the services to understand what their needs are and what they need to get from the market and the dynamics of the market. So that all forms part of the category strategies that we develop with the services. How that differs from the HPCS system is the HPCS system is purely a procurement system where you would go out, you issue the quotations and you invite the supply chain to come back, but there is no accreditation that's required on that. So it's, you know, anyone can register in that system, whereas within the DPS, those that are registered have to be accredited for delivering those types of services. And that's probably the primary difference between them. I'll try to keep it simple, not overcomplicated, but so in terms of why we haven't done a sample, I simply haven't asked the officers to undertake a sample of those. But the difficulty that we have is that we have to go into the system, into each opportunity, open up the opportunity, and then do some system interrogation. Yeah.
I do understand that, but way back last meeting, 2 meetings ago, it's exactly what I sort of thought. Sorry, okay, so you can't give the full figures, it's too complicated, but you could reassure everybody by giving random sample here and there, and then we can see, oh, well, that's what it looks like, you know?
Yeah, so I'll pick that up and I'll take that away.
So, yeah, I'll come back to the end. Councillor Mason.
Thank you. And thanks a lot for the report. As being on the other end of procurement and putting lots of bids to local authorities, and some of them have great systems and some terrible systems.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I think the DPS system is better because, and I'm glad that that's the way that we're going, because it does give a lot more opportunity to small enterprises. But that's particularly what I'd like to ask you about, which is that alongside this system, have we got a plan, a proposal around how we can ensure that local people benefit most from, when possible, that the growth of local business and local people in employment is really important around the council? Just wanted to know how that will be enhanced by the new system.
Okay, so when we talk, just ask, clarify, just in terms of the local side of things, so just to give you some stats around the DPS, which might help here as well. So within the dynamic purchasing system, around 90% of the contracts are actually given to SMEs. Okay, of that, there's probably 35% of that is roughly within Harringay. Okay, so that's kind of just to give you some figures in relation to that. The reason it's not higher is because some of the services that we have don't lend itself to the profile of suppliers that we have within the borough. Going forward, in terms of how we attract, and you know, me and my team probably interact with other around the council to see what we can do to promote more local supply chains and also employment opportunities within the borough. So we will regularly attend events with local businesses and other colleagues across the council. Going forward, so we're in the process of developing a social value policy, which will incorporate the social, economic and environmental elements of that and how that will interact with our procurement activity. And so essentially there will be what's aligned to the national funds, which is the themes, outcomes and measures, a group of social value elements that supply chain can bid on, and we are mandating the use of that with contracts at a certain threshold and then considered below that. And so that when we go out to market, we look to signpost the supply chain to where our priorities are and where we want particular focus on some of those social values. They can then respond through a tool which is Social Value Portal, and it outlines all of their commitments, and within those commitments they are contractually binding, and if they don't deliver according to those contractual commitments, then there is liquidated damages that are applied so that we ensure we are getting value from that. Social value is really important to me, and if you look at the procurement strategy, it's not around driving lower cost in terms of the contracts, it's actually around how we can deliver more local social. That's where our priorities are, and that's what aligns with the National Procurement Strategy and also what's going to be embedded in the new Procurement Act, which is coming on.
Thank you. Can we just ask you very quickly if we could see the social value policy when it's complete and it's, should we get access to it or not?
Well, we're at the moment developing it, and once we've got a bit further, it will come to members for comment. Is the plan on
Thank
this?
you.
Right, thank you. So, Councillor Hammond.
Yeah, that's a very small question. I mean, firstly, I just think straight to the it's a very odd time, information going on in services. But I'm glad it's on the move, and I'm so grateful that everybody is not in the issue. The couple of things I wanted to ask about, I would quite like to have benchmark positions so that we understand exactly where we are at the moment and where we're heading towards, because at the moment I've got no comparison when it's better. I don't know when it's going to be better, but I mean, so even on local, you know, if you could do it by postcode, how many contracts were awarded by to local companies, just to set some sort of level of benchmarks so that when the new system comes into play, we're a year later able to see exactly what its impact has been or not, as the case may be. And I'd quite like to, I don't know whether it's possible, have a couple of companies or organisations feed back to us about the difficulties they have or not, as the case again, you know, what works for them, what doesn't, because it seems to me it's an opportunity to really improve the structure of how we function and to get some processes in now to get that, to help that improvement happen would be a really helpful thing for the future. The second thing is, I know this is a very important report, and I'm so sorry, but I really don't understand a lot of it. And I mean, I can see it's a very, very expensive thing. So I would like to understand it a little bit better. So even if you're just able to tell me a little bit more about what this whole thing is about, you know, would be helpful. I'm so sorry.
What do you know about the system, e-procurement system?
I'm moving ahead. Well, I can ask the next person. You're the next person, so you come back to it. But yeah, so I think for me, the biggest thing is in procurement has always been understanding what its impact is locally, and I think I've always struggled with pushing for a much more localized approach. So I think understanding what the benchmarks are would be a really helpful thing.
I think we need to concise to the questions. We've got three more questions. Three more will be asking questions. If we can be concise and straight to the point.
So it's very difficult to benchmark if we're benchmarking against other authorities, because actually a lot of my peers don't collate that same information that we do. and then certainly in the way we do that, so it would be quite difficult. But I can, absolutely tell you how many contracts that we have within the borough, what the spend is, and that's so yes, that information is available. Obviously, when the new system processes and improvements that we're bringing forward, then we already track that information now, so we would be able to year on year go forward.
I think it would be nice if we were given, I'm not interested in the other local authorities, I'm quite insular looking, unfortunately. So I'm just focused on Harringay. So I'm looking for us to have some benchmarks on Harringay would be helpful, but where we are now,
Yeah.
where we were last year, and then we can compare. So I'm not that interested. I know you guys are very.
That information is available.
So, Councillor Rossetti.
Very quickly, another was an action, and the action has been marked as complete, but the system has not been delivered yet. So I wonder if it's possible to have an update towards the end of the year, assuming that everything stays as planned.
Yes.
And maybe you can come back and let us know.
Yes. So, I mean.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I said yes, that's fine. You can do that. Yeah.
Reyes, you got a question?
Thank you, Chair. Just on the e-procurement system,
Yeah.
I'm assuming it's replacing both systems?
Yes.
Yeah. The timeline seems, to me anyway, quite tight to get a functioning end-to-end system. And from my experience, that normally comes with a lot of heartache if we don't get it right. So I guess from an audit committee perspective, I think we would like some assurances that the key threads that are involved in a project of this size, it's business process re-engineering, control redesign, data migration, etc., is in place. And I've read somewhere that we're going to consult our audit colleagues. But to what extent is internal audit involved? They can give this assurance that the benefits that we have identified from this new system are actually going to be realized and they're measurable.
So, absolutely agree with you. The timescales are extremely tight. That's mitigated insofar as that it's kind of, I'm going to say, an off-the-shelf type solution. So it's already pre-configured. There are controls and features and workflows and stuff like that within the system, which we will configure a bit further on. So essentially what they're going to be doing is over the next sort of 6 to 8 weeks, they get the base model in place. And then we have more involvement around dictating, if you like, what those controls are, what those approval mechanisms, etc., are within. In terms of the involvement with audit, it's not just audit that we're involving officers from the services, so they will be invited into workshops throughout the programme. The programme is being led by Digital Services. There is a specific project that has a programme manager and various subject matter experts. The supplier is providing and doing all the data migration and project management, a lot of activities because it's their system, they know how to implement it. But I'm regularly having conversations with National Audit and even now raising concerns where there are certain areas that I'd like to look at closer and that I'm asking Audit to provide some support and be involved in some of those discussions. What I want to do is end up with a system that we're going, well, by the way, Audit, this is what we've implemented. Are you okay with that? No, it's much more integrated.
Yeah, I guess my only response to that is I've seen the response before, and the earlier we get the likes of Audit to review what is being implemented and whether those benefits are realizable or not. Things go wrong. a number of times.
Yes.
But more wrong than right, let's put it that way.
Yes, I've got the scars as well. So,
So I think for an area that is of this importance to the council, and another area where we are likely to identify where we can save can spend based on the output from the system. The imperative to make sure that we follow all the right steps is not compromising that.
but absolutely, in terms of the compliance and ensuring that that's done, that is, that's kind of key throughout that. In terms of the benefits realisation, I'm very keen that we get this in because I feel that it will help the council in terms of the category management in being much more commercial when we go out to market, because we'll have the data and we'll have the information all within the system that will help inform certain decisions that we make around when to go to market, how to go to market. We'd also understand the average. There's a lot more information that will be available through this system that we don't currently have, but will ultimately should drive out value for money.
I'm going to ask the questions. Thank you. So Barry, and we will end this. So Barry, thank you so much for your report. So with any new system that you embarking on, which will require a plan going forward for the implementation, and it has to become like a mainstream line through the council services. As you rightly mentioned, Clay, data is really important. How do you envisage to implement the solution through the council? Which will also involve training to ensure that staff are properly trained and they can actually use the system rather than ad hoc or separate systems. How you can streamline, move away from two systems into one system. But also, how would you ensure that this system is good value for money that you are purchasing or proposing to purchase?
Okay.
Is it going to be those two systems, and how this in terms of value for money?
Okay, so just in terms of the value for money, I don't have off the top of my head what the savings would be by consolidating two systems into one. And digital services is leading on that, so I'd need to double check to understand what things are. But I do know that there are MTFS savings with that as part of the broader digital services program. In terms of the implementation and how we intend to roll it out across the organisation, ensuring that we've got the right users trained on the system. So we do have a change resource within the project that will be supporting us in relation to that. There's a kind of whole communication programme which we will be kicking off over the next few weeks. We've already started to some degree, but obviously the more we understand the system, the more we're clear on the functionality, the more we can start to communicate that. So there will be a training program in place. My team will be the main users, certainly because there's a further improvement program as well, which is running alongside this, and considering the Procurement Act coming in. So what we're looking to do is to look into integrate the new Procurement Act and the new regulations, communicating that across the organisation, as well as doing kind of system training, because the in relation to that. So there will be a training program, there'll be user guides. The system itself has context sensitive help, so when you're in a screen, the help guides that are within that that are embedded in the system will relate directly to that activity or that screen that you're accessing as well. So I'm not sure if that's enough, or would you like?
No, that's absolutely fine. My worry is that it is important to utilise the system properly within the workforce, because there's huge investment into this, and we have to ensure that it operates the way it should operate and captures the data the way that we want it to capture. So thank you so much for those. I'm going to move on, Councillor Mason, because we've got quite a lot on the agenda. So, so we just need to note the updates and progress being made in relation to the implementation of the new procurement system. E-procurement system. So that's what noted.
So the product Panacea is the name of the system. Yeah, but we refer to it as the procurement system.
Because that Panacea wouldn't necessarily make any sense in terms of the user, so it has to have a name. E-procurement. Okay. Thanks so much, Barry.
Chair, in terms of report backs, I think
It's
that
going to come.
can we ask for what's going to be reported back out of that discussion?
Well, I think we've got a couple of action points that Barry will come back to the committee with updates in relation to how the system's been implemented. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to know the random, just an example of, the information that we are still not getting.
I think that's, Barry made a commitment that he's going to share the outcomes of those quotations that you have put forward to him. And that's been noted, that's been minuted, and that's part of the action plan.
Thank you.
And well, can we also ask then, do we know what mitigations are in place to ensure that the risk of bringing in the new system is dealt with? We seem to have to Birmingham recently, so I'm just thinking, oh my God. So I'm not saying it's going to happen here, but that's why I'm interested in what risk mitigations. Thank you. That's, I mean, we can send it to us, that's great. Thank you.
You must have a date.
And the dates are on the report.
That stuff.
So you want a date for those action points to be, it will be the next meeting, the upcoming meeting for the audit committee.
By the next meeting.
I don't know what the new Procurement Act is.
Like to spend some time on it now.
You can just maybe send that because so much in terms of the procurement act. Okay, thank you, Barry.
Thank you.
Okay, so the report has been noted. Okay. So item 9, external audit plan. Can I now invite officers to introduce the report? Casey, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, members and colleagues. My name is Casey Kegu. I'm the Chief Accountant of the Borough. This report is by KPMG. KPMG is our incoming auditors. We are into the second appointment period now. So KPMG starts from the year 2023-24 to 27. That's 5-year period, 27-28. So the report they are bringing before you is a draft audit plan. It's not the final report because as I will talk you through later, there are some events that are yet to conclude, including BDO completing the audit of previous years that will inform the final which we will be bringing to the committee by July, the next meeting session. So I'll leave Tim and Josh to introduce themselves to you.
Yeah, so Tim and Josh, you can introduce yourself and tell us some.
Good evening, everyone. Introduce myself first. My name is Tim Cutler. I'm your proposed engagement leader from KPMG. I've worked in and around public sector audit for many years now. Experience with local government, healthcare, education, social housing. Very much looking forward to working with you. I also lead KPMG's relationship with National Audit Office, Local Auditors Group, the FRC's local audit team, and I'm the contact partner for the PSAA. So hopefully well placed to support the committee navigate what's going on at the moment. Josh, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Josh Parkinson, Manager in the Public Sector Department at KPMG. Similar to Tim, also have a range of clients across healthcare, education and local government.
Okay. So the report itself, in case you stole my thunder a little bit, it's a little bit of what I was about to say, but it's a draft plan. But what we were very keen to do for you this evening is come along and demonstrate that with thanks to management for engaging with us, we have been able to make good progress in commencing the March 24 audit. So what we've got for you today And I take the hint about wanting clarity in the presentation, so I will try and do that as best I can. Well, I'll try and talk through what the document is here to do, but I think before I talk about what I am presenting, I'll quickly cover what I'm not presenting. So what you've not got today is the value for money risk assessment. We're on our way with that. That will be coming to a later meeting. And what we'll also do, probably the July meeting, I think that's how it works in the schedules, but at the July meeting, we also should have been able to finalise the financial statements audit plan, hopefully incorporating some of what Casey was referring to around the prior year audits. Because we're in a slightly unusual situation at the moment that we are starting as your new auditors without the ability to gather assurance from our predecessors. Normally, auditing standards and audit protocols would mean we would speak to the outgoing auditors, we would review their work, and then we would start work on your own audit. Clearly, we're not in a situation where we can do that. So we are doing a lot of extensive review, challenge, conversation with management. We've been on site all day today, having a number of conversations with management, really to get to know you as an organisation and to inform as best we can the risk assessment that we've put in front of you today. So, and I would like to just go on record as thanking management for engaging with us. Clearly, you know, it's been a new experience for several involved. So we'll thank them for that, and we'll continue to do that over the next few months. So in terms of what I will present in the documents, before I present, what I would say, and I have done this with other local authorities, I'd be more than happy if there are members that want to spend a bit more time understanding auditing standards or how we go about our work. We can offer a session, maybe out with the meetings, where we can spend a bit more time talking about the rudiments of audit and how we do that. So I'd be very happy to do that. If I try and pick out the key points of the document that you've got today, or what's important to consider whether I've actually presented this to you, if I pick out on slide 89 of the pack, we set out what we view as our materiality for the audit. Now, materiality is an auditing concept where we say a level, we have to set a level over which we would deem that error, if there was an error, to affect the reader of the accounts true in their view. So if we found an error greater than the £21.8 million that we've set out there, that would affect the reader's view of the accounts. Now that sounds like a big number, but what we have to look at is this as a percentage of your gross expenditure, which is over £1 billion, and also your asset base, which I think is over £2 billion from the top of my head. So clearly, when you put it in that perspective, it's not a huge number, and that's why we look at it from the effect of changing the reader's view of the accounts. But we don't just do audit work, we don't just not audit below that threshold, we then design our procedures at the lower figure of 14.1. We do that to make sure we've created some margin for error when we're designing our procedures to make sure we are absolutely finding anything that's at that materiality threshold. And then we set another level, which is just over 1 million, which is the misstatements which we would bring to you as audit committee. So anything in between the 1 and the 21, we would report to you, and collectively you would make a decision whether or not management adjusts the financial statements. Okay. So after that, I was just proposing to walk through the individual significant risks that we see at this stage impacting your financial statements. Now, each one of these are where we believe is the highest chance that there could be a material error in your financial statements. And that's where we as auditors tend to really focus our procedures. We do audit everything else, but we don't really throw audit efforts into those to the same extent as we do these 4 areas. The first of those areas is valuation of land and buildings. So management appoints a third-party valuer to do that valuation on their behalf. We equally ask our own valuation specialist to challenge the work of your valuer to make sure that the figures that feature in the accounts are true and fair. But again, why is that a significant risk? Well, it's just a large estimate. It's a judgment. People are making a judgment around the value of your estate, and I noted from the report we had earlier on the agenda, there's some big numbers there. So what we're after doing is really challenging the assumptions, particularly in our first year, to make sure that the assumptions are applied correctly and based on the right sort of information. Then I have management override of controls. Again, that's a standard risk you would see in any set of financial statements or any financial statements audit. And really that's us developing some professional skepticism to say, how could management influence how these financial statements appear? The main way we approach that is through meeting with management, reviewing minutes, papers, etc., but also to do a lot of work around your journals process and the journals, because journals are the way that management post transactions into the ledgers. We go through a lot of process using data and analytics now, which really challenges the nature and the type of those journals. In a similar way to land and buildings, we also look at the valuation of pensions. So within your accounts, you have very significant balances associated with the assets and liabilities in the pension fund. We are as well also responsible for the pension fund audit itself. We will receive a plan separately to that later in the cycle, but we also audit the disclosures in the IAS 19 balances for the pension liabilities and assets that you hold as an authority as well. Again, we don't just sort of challenge this ourselves. We use our own actuaries, we use our own pension experts to challenge the work of management and the fund actuaries in this area. And then finally, we have expenditure recognition. Again, that's a standard risk in the public sector because of the pressure, the budgetary pressure you face. What we ask ourselves is, if management are under pressure to achieve a certain budget or target, how is that likely to look? And at the moment, and this could be subject to change as we get to know you as an organisation and some of the incentives, we tend to see that more about the completeness risk. So because you're under a lot of financial pressure at the moment, we see management's incentive more to defer expenditure into the next financial year, i.e. to meet a budgetary target in the current year. So the way we'll approach that is to look at what we call unrecorded liabilities. So at the year end, as we're coming up to the 31st of March, what could management defer into April or May instead of posting in the current year to make those accounts look more positive? Again, not for 1 second, we haven't that's anything that suggests management are doing that, but that's our duty as auditors to be sceptical and look for those issues when we find them. So that's the risk profile. Again, we may reserve the right to change any of that. We will also bring the value from the commentary to you to a future meeting. Within the appendices, we set out, firstly, the fees that you pay for the audit. I should remind everybody at that point, they're set by PSAA, they're not set by us. We also set out our independence declaration. That's us setting out the fact that we are independent, we are in a position to be objective when providing your audit opinion. At that point, I'll pause, but I'll happily answer any questions that members have.
Thank you for your presentation, Paul. So, questions?
One small one.
Sure, of course, Councillor.
Thank you. Which is about the reserves and how those are being managed. Do you give a report to us about those? Because they're clearly really difficult at the moment because of restrictions on spend.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a number of different reserves. Obviously, we won't produce a separate report on reserves per se, but what we will do throughout our audit work is look at the approach to those reserves, the disclosure of them, and we will also look at the governance around those reserves. So, for example, particularly with things like earmark reserves, with the governance policies you have around things moving in and out of.
Yes.
Thanks, Chair. Tim, I guess I'm not surprised, but would you not rate the lack of previous audits as a significant risk in terms of the work you have to do in opening balances?
So that's, as Casey referred to just before I presented, that is one of the reasons this has to remain in draft.
Sure.
So in a normal situation, clearly this isn't, but in any normal situation, we would take the assurances or lack of assurances that the prior auditors give us, and we would then factor that into it. Now, what's going on at the moment, and again, I think there's the next item in the agenda is going to touch on this a little bit, is various work being led by regulators to really understand how we move from a situation with several unaudited years to a closing balance sheet audit in March 24 that can be delivered and move the system on. And that is the bit that means I can't answer your question directly at this point, but it also means, we're not yet in a position to conclude the audit plan, because what we should be saying in the audit plan, particularly as a first year audit, is exactly to your point, this is how we're going to approach the opening balance sheet audit. So we're expecting that conversation to play out over the next couple of months. And certainly by the time, if we were to bring this back in, say, July, we would hope to be in a position to tell you fully how we will provide assurance on the opening balance sheet, or indeed, if we're not, why not?
Yeah.
And just one last one, kind of related, and I guess will come down the line in the next 5 years, but what are some of the assurances that KPMG can give us that we will not be in this position again? where we can't have complete audits?
Well, I think the system is looking to put safeguards in itself to prevent that happening again. So whilst they're still at consultation stage at the moment, I'm sorry, I might be in danger of presenting your the next item now, but what the proposal is at the moment is for what they call backstop dates to be put in for every subsequent year between now and 28, I think it is. And what that effectively does, it provides the audited body and the auditor with a deadline by which the audit has to be concluded, one way or another. Now, I can sit here today and assure you, and hopefully management have had this message from us, that we have the resource to do that audit later this year. And the fact, I think we've probably been out in sufficient numbers already over the last few weeks and months to get to where we've got today, hopefully means you can see you're in a better situation than you have been. However, you know, we have to wait and see how that consultation plays out, and in particular when we can start your year-end audit, March 24. In theory, until we've got the answer to what happens to March 23, we haven't got a clear plan for how we.
I guess my question is coming from the point of view in terms of what the audit firm can control, and from what I understand of the situation that the country's in, it's the efficient side that they can't provide the resources to fulfill the audits. So from that perspective, the firms are in controllable positions.
I need to be very careful not to speak for firms from the previous contract. All I can tell you is we have gone into this new contract round very well cited on the resource we need to service this contract. And I can give you assurance that that resource is there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Those questions will break up. Articulate them much better. On the group materiality, which you kindly explained, which I'm grateful for, because I have been looking at it thinking, is it possible to reduce it by any chance, so the actual base is slightly smaller than it is at the moment?
It's my judgment, I would say, at the start of this. I mean, auditing standards will set out the range that we should follow when applying it. So that range moves from 0.5% to 3%. Where we have you sit is around the 2% mark. Because what should drive materiality is the external stakeholder perception of local authority financial statements. Now, the reason we sit at 2% is we don't want to be at 3% because we recognise, you know, it's a sector that has its challenges. However, we also take the view that the majority of the public, and you don't have things like debt covenants, you've no lender stakeholders that should pay a particular interest in your accounts. The majority of the public will focus their attention on your budget reports and your operational KPIs. We would suggest that the vast majority of the public do not look at your financial statements as the main way of apprising account performance. For that reason, we tend to leave materiality at that level. It's also quite helpful from the point of view of concluding the audit not to have a level that's so low that you're forced to amend everything in order for us to conclude the audit and provide an unqualified opinion. So we think that's a sort of a quite pragmatic level in terms of the true and fair view, but also to not get bogged down and allow us to bring to you as audit committee those misstatements that you can form a view on.
Thank you.
My question that Reyes has actually asked that, and you have covered in terms of resourcing to ensure that you have sufficient resources to deliver the audit plan as described. But you answered that.
Yeah, well, feel free to keep me challenging me on that. I'm sure you will. But that's where we are.
Okay. Thank you so much. So we note the report. So we move on to the next item. Item 10. Update on the outstanding audit of statements of accounts 2021, 22, 23, and that's with Casey. Yeah, take the hot seat, Casey, please.
No, sorry, I didn't know.
That's fine. Casey.
No, come to the hot seat. Let's let me reintroduce myself. My name is Casey Kendu. I'm the Chief Accountant of the Borough, and I have here with me.
The Deputy Chief Accountant.
So, members, the report you have before you is update on the outstanding audit of statement of accounts for the past 3 years. This is not a decision report, but we are recommending that you note the position with the outstanding accounts that we have. I've tried to simplify this report and break it down into several sections. I'm just going to quickly talk through the areas. The first part of it is giving you a national picture of where we are in audit of accounts. So basically, we are in a very challenging period where accounts from 2000, for some authorities from 2015-16 are still not audited. There's no audit opinion on them up to 2023. So we have a cumulative of about, as at September 2023, of about 918 accounts not yet. As a result, governments, the local authorities, audit firms have been meeting, consulting, looking for solutions to resolve these problems. And that led to the consultation we've been talking about called the backstop arrangements. That was, the papers were published 8th of February, and it's ending, I think it's today, yeah. The consultation is ending today. So simply, that backstop arrangement is such, in a very simple term, what it means is that auditors are encouraged to clear the backlog of audits they have by September 2024, 30th of September 2025. Where they are not able to do that, then the outstanding years, there'll be a disclaimer on those accounts. So that's, in a very simplistic term, that's what it means. But there's a lot of, items in that consultation document, like we talked about the opening balances and things that need to be solved. So for us in Haringey, locally, I'll use the word locally, we have just 3 years, 2020, 21 to 2023. And of the 3 years accounts, we have 2020, 21. The audit started quite at the right time. We agreed with the outgoing external auditors, but it's taken about 2 to 3 years now to complete, mainly because of issues around capacity within the audit firm to carry on the audits. And for some of you here who are members of the old corporate committee, would have had the external auditors come to these meetings and highlight the fact that yes, that they are having issues with staffing to carry out the audits. And it's part of why the whole backstop arrangement and consultation started. And as part of the procurement for this second period, one thing that they've done to address the issue, which came out through the procurement exercise, identified the need for that capacity. And that's why the audit fees has been raised for this year and going forward significantly to address that. And for us, at Haringey, we have, in accordance with the accounts and audit regulations, prepared all the years. So if you go on the website, you see all the years we prepared accounts, but it's just that the auditors haven't had time to actually get around auditing these accounts. And following the consultation, our auditors, outgoing external auditors, had come back to us and approached us and proposed to recommence the 2022-23 audit with us. So what this paper is trying to, in summary, say is we have considered a lot of issues and a lot of things with that proposal, basically around the fact that they have made it clear to us that 2021, 22, and 2022-23, that they will never be able to do that within the time frame of September 2024. So basically, those 2 years will be disclaimed, but they want to restart the 2020-21. And we tried to discuss with them in terms of starting this audit at this period. Just to note that within this same period, we have the incoming auditors doing their walkthrough test with us. And we are in March now. We're at year end. We need to prepare the books for the next one. And by the regulation, we need to publish the next account by 31st of May. So we found out from them that actually the 2020-21 accounts they want to revisit, they are going to be retesting some of the things they've done in the past. Understandably so, because it's been like 2.5 years now. So some of their audit methodology would have changed, and there has been a lot of changes. So, but we just felt at this point, one, we need resource to support the future going forward, to address our year end, and which, when we've assessed it initially, it feels like we'll be spending not less than 250K to get additional resource to support several audits going on at the same time at this period. And we didn't quite get assurance from them that even when they start now, that they'll be able to finish it before April, because usually by April they'll go for NHS audits and then come back around July, August, if they do come back at all. We didn't quite get that assurance that this will actually finish. And we didn't really want to jeopardize now and the future for an account that we don't even know whether they'll finish. And also, even if they finish, the subsequent 2 years will be disclaimed. So, and because the consultation is still on as at the time this proposal was brought, we told them that we have to defer this year starting while we focus on what we're doing now with KPMG and year-end activities. And once we get clarity or direction from government following the consultation, that's about May or so, then we can invite them back to actually see what they'll be able to do for September 2024. It's a difficult position we find ourselves, not just us. A lot of boroughs are in the same positions, and we've been talking to other boroughs to know exactly what they are doing about it. And I think what we're doing is consistent with what some of our neighboring boroughs are doing. I think that is where we are. So based on all those reasons are stipulated in the summary section of the report, the Director of Finance took a decision to define that audits. So until after the consultation, and we get direction from governments. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Reyes, then I got Councillor Rossi, then Councillor Mason.
Casey, thank you for the. I think firstly, I'd just like to note that I think it's a little bit disappointing that the previous auditors in the chair to. Sorry, I've got a bit of a. I just wanted to say that I think it's a little bit disappointing. It's obviously not your fault that the previous auditors are not here to answer some of the questions that we may have. But in saying that, the approach that the council is taking around the
2020-21, yeah,
audit sounds sound in terms of the cost versus benefit. I guess my question is from a borrowing perspective, and the councils, and not just Haringey, but other councils' reliance on borrowing, whether it's external or from government. How do these disclaimer opinions impact, firstly, our ability to borrow from banks, and secondly, the interest rates that these disclaimers are likely to attract?
Let me start with Haringey. The one thing is, the good thing is that most of our borrowing is from Public Works Loan Board, PWLB, and maybe inter-authority borrowings that we have. But I think part of why the whole thing, that's why I said I just simplify the backstop arrangement. It's a huge document and involves a lot. Even after the consultation ends, there still be conversations going on, which, like Tim said, is rightly involved in it, really. And part of those conversations will be looking at, how to mitigate the impact of the disclaimer opinion, really, both on the sides of the authority and the impact in terms of the auditors who are actually going to be taking over, and even the ones that are going. But in terms of local authorities and borrowing, I don't see that really impacting on anything. And I think it's a national issue, really, and this is why it's looking for a national solution. So I'm very sure that in terms of the wording of those disclaimers, it will be drafted or agreed in such a way that it wouldn't really have a lot of impact or significant impact on local authorities' ability to borrow, if any actually borrows from private institutions.
Well, I guess the end of the consultation will be the telling point. Yeah.
Hence the reason they'll give us a couple of months to understand what that consultation would look like in terms of the backstop arrangement. So, Councillor?
I also wanted to ask about the business course as well.
You covered. So, Councillor, I mean? Yeah.
Can I just ask about presumably paid these auditors? So I just wonder about the practicalities. I'm assuming that they've been paid and done the work and everything else. So is there anything we can do to take action against them? I mean, it just feels, if I was thinking just for the audit committee sake, we haven't had proper accounts. We don't have a proper final statement that we can be absolutely clear about. So it just worries me a little bit. One, it has implications for us, for audit, but also for the council. And I guess I just think they've been paid and getting money back.
I think part of those discussions that be going on will be in terms of they have actually the audit firms are paid at the end of audit.
Oh, so they haven't been paid yet?
So yeah, they haven't been paid for that year. But in terms of whether they'll be paid or not, I think it's not a decision we have to make, because the contract we don't have a contract with them. The contract is between them and PSA. But I mean, they are all going to be forming part of that discussion, because for us, we have also asked that same question. John Wallow has asked that question. And I'm very sure it will be addressed as part of this one. And Harringay won't be doing your local.
And I think the statement on the website, if it's a disclaimer, I mean, it needs to be worded that it's not our fault, as it were. I think, because if someone sounds like we could be held responsible for not producing that.
Yeah, but our accounts are up to date. So our accounts are up to date. So it's the auditor section hasn't been audited due to applications. Right. Our accounts are up to date in terms of account-wise. So we're in a really strong position. It's more about not being audited, and hopefully with what this backstop arrangement will look like, that will give us some sort of indication how we'll proceed to the next stage. And I think that is really important in terms of put resources in place so we get 23-24 with our partner. Otherwise, we might be delaying that audit too. So, but my understanding, looking at the report, Casey, is that for value for money audits still needs to be made by previous auditors, right? Value for money audit.
Yes. The report did say that, and they have actually, I would say, commenced. Really, they've sent us inquiries. They want to start that value for money audit. So it's part of the whole backstop arrangement. They have to carry out the value for money audit. So.
Is there any further questions, members, in relation to this report? Yeah, Councillor Mason.
Thank you. And thank you very much for this. It's obviously a huge concern to us, and it's about the public perception of how Harringay is doing financially at a time when local authorities are in such a difficult position financially, and there's been an exposure, as we know, by some local authorities. Then I think our interest is in making sure that all the risks are mitigated as far as possible. The credit risk, which has been articulated, thank you, and also the reputational risk. So in terms of that, I understand that the finances, they were correct, but that external authority, I think with them, does carry a lot of weight. And so I just wanted to know whether we are going to agree a statement, if depending on what happens, that there will be an agreed statement about what happened, so that we are able to shift, to at least bear some of it. At the moment, people think Haringey has done something really bad by not having, this is just the ordinary person, not you or us, but generally, reputationally, people say, but they haven't had audited accounts for 3 years. And it's, we as councillors are the ears of what goes on, and that's what we hear. So we would say, no, it's not just Haringey, and we're mitigating that so much. It would be really good to have something from yourselves, not necessarily straight away, but once you're ready, so that we have something to bounce back at people.
Yeah.
So that we're not blaming Haringey.
Yeah, I understand what you said. I think we feel that way too, because we put in a lot of efforts, the officers, into these years, and it just feels like you wanted that validation from auditors, and you've not had that validation. Like you said, I mean, you look around you, it's a national issue, it's everywhere you turn. And
we're here to protect Haringey.
So hopefully once we have clear directives in terms of how we move forward, that will inform the kind of message we put out there.
Yeah.
So we'll do that.
Very quickly, sorry. I think the consultation was tonight. And usually when the government does consultation, it takes a long time to publish some sort of way forward and guidelines. So I guess that what will happen in the future will depend a lot on the conclusion from the consultation. So do we have any indication if this time is going to be a bit quicker, or if, if it drags for like 5-6 months, it's probably that's going to impact us?
The expectation is that we're looking at towards May ending, but that, as you know, this is an election year. That might be a factor.
No, because a lot of things I don't care about the result of the consultation, and sometimes
the government is very keen to resolve this issue as quickly as possible. So,
could it be helpful if it's just a comment on that? Sure. So this won't require primary legislation. Okay. This will be secondary legislation. What it will take is, once the consultation closes today, they'll then have a period of time, which they hope to keep to a few weeks, of actually processing what the responses are, and then it will have to sit in Parliament for 40 days. So pending any general election announcement, it will be that 40-day window from quite a long process, the consultation. So we've been told to expect, around May, early June time.
Thanks. So can we just note the council, position of the outstanding external audit in the council's statements and accounts? Thank you, Casey. Right. Good. So item 11 is the management report, quarter 3, 2024. Tim, could you please introduce your report?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. My name is Tim Mpofu. I'm the Head of Pensions and Treasury, and I'll be introducing the agenda item 11, which is the Treasury Management Report for the third quarter of 2023-2024. It is good to be here in person. I think I've done a few meetings remotely, but it's good to see you all. So this particular report is rather benign compared to the ones that we've discussed before. Essentially, it's just an update on the activity throughout the course of the year. The main thing to highlight really is on the economic background, which is essentially that the UK is now in what they consider to be a technical recession. So this was announced earlier this year, and this is just 2 negative quarters of negative performance. The performance was just negative 0.1%, 0.3%. So non-material, and at this point, we don't think it will have any significant impact on the economic conditions around the UK. And then there was a comment from the Chancellor the Bank of England governor will just say that they actually assume that that recession has already ended, but we're waiting to see what this quarter report looks like. So in terms of the main highlights, again, from an economic standpoint, the main thing to highlight is the inflation rates have started to decline, albeit I think this month they've gone slightly up again, back to 4%. All this indicates that it is likely that the Bank of England is going to delay lowering the rates. The markets at the moment are still pricing that there will be a rate cut at some point before the summer, up to 5%. And over the course of the next 5 years, we expect that those rates will reduce to somewhere around 3.5%. So this will have implications both on the borrowing strategy, but also on the long-term investment strategy. In section 6.12 of the report, I've just sort of outlined the PWB borrowings, which is the rate of borrowing that the council undertakes. This is just compared from the start of the year in March 23 and up to December. You can see that there's been a period of volatility, rates going up and down. And the council did not take much borrowing at the earlier stage of the year. In the later stages, we have been taking some borrowing, primarily to replace maturities that were occurring in the year. So you see in one of the tables in the appendix that it's been more or less around 3 million is the change over the year. Between now and the end of the year, there will be further borrowing that the council will need to take in order to maintain the same levels of cash balances. In section 6.17, there is an update in terms of the Treasury investment activity. This is just to highlight that over the course of the year, as we've seen those rates increase, so has the ability of the council to generate income from its deposits. The council primarily deposits its money with PWB, with the debt management office, but also with money market funds. And in section 6.18, there is that comparison with other local authorities, which the Treasury advisor keeps under regular review. The final thing to highlight to members is just to comment on the Treasury management potential indicators that are contained in section 6 of the appendix, just to highlight again that they're all compliant with the CIFRA code of practice and also the council's Treasury management strategy. So those are the key things to highlight now. I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions?
I'd say it's nice to see Jimmy in person.
I did emphasize that. It's good to see Tim in person. He has been online for a while.
In person.
Thank you very much, Tim. So can I just ask the committee to review and approve the update for annual internal audit strategy plan 24-25 plan A, the internal audit charter, and sorry, am I reading wrong? Sorry, Tim. I'm all over the place. Sorry, spare me. To note the treasury management activity undertaken during the quarter ended 31st of December 2023, the performance achieved, which is attached to Appendix 1 to the report. And we note the treasury activities and the treasury management strategy. Thank you. Thank you so much. Right. The next item, which is item 12, the annual internal audit plan strategy. Minesh.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. My name is Minesh Chani. I'm the head of audit and risk management. And at this time of the year, I usually come to you with the plan of work I have for the internal audit team for next year. It is quite usual for me when I think about a plan to consider a number of important principles, and this year, perhaps more so than previous years, that thought process has had to be a little bit more thoughtful and a little bit more detailed. And to help with that, I consulted quite widely in the organisation to speak to more people than I would usually do, just to get a sense of where the organisation is at and where really the risks are in the organisation. So what I've presented to you, and that's on pages 145, I think, of the back, is a plan that tries to cover a number of risk areas, primarily around the corporate risks the organisation faces, that are focused on financial controls, including the delivery of savings, which are quite an important facet of our budget for next year. I've also considered the change management programme. There are a number of initiatives that the organisation has around changes, and responding to an earlier question that we had around the procurement changes, you'll see that I've tried to capture some of the changes that are proposed there around the new operating model for procurement, the source-to-pay system, and the like. I've also tried to recognise what I've previously brought to this meeting as areas of concern, to keep an oversight of those areas and make sure that we are following those through. That's not been an easy task. I have included what I think are the most important areas, and I have a basket of other areas which I have thought about but not included in the plan, because I think that would overwhelm the work that my team does. I would say that I think I will need to keep a very close eye over the work that we do next year and the risks that are likely to arise next year, because I think I'll have to be agile and slightly flexible in some of the work that I've done. If I just now refer to the specific areas of the document. So starting from page 145 and thinking about the audit plan, you'll see that there are a number of corporate areas. These include the delivery of savings, some of the other issues that I've spoken to this committee before about, assurances around data governance. Members may recall that I identified data governance as an area of risk in the AGS that I presented last year. So it'd be good to just follow that up now. Some key areas of control around our ability to respond to FOIs, AEs, the scheme of delegation, hospitality kits, the usual systems of control. And then for each of the directorates, some specific areas of risk. I've spoken to each of the directors and tried to understand what that nature of risk is. And these are some of the suggestions, plus some of the assurances I think we should have in terms of taking the audit assurances forward. I'm almost tempted to pause there and take questions, because I'm just going to read through all the different areas of the plan, and I'm just happy to take any questions I think at that point. Chair, if I can come back to the other appendices afterwards.
Sure. Just one second. Just one second. We'll put Councillor Rossetti first, Councillor Mason, then Councillor.
Thanks. I just want to mention, very glad to see the leisure services insourcing pre-implementation in the audit plan, because this has been also raised in this committee in the past. And because we've just had the report on the delivery of the leisure services, I'm just wondering if that would sort of be used as a lesson learned and provide some inputs to this audit.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, indeed. I think it's a very valuable point. The committee asked me with management to look at the arrangements we had for the delivery of leisure services previously, and the level of assurance I'm able to give is quite low in that respect. Thankfully, I think things have moved on. There are further steps being taken organisationally to provide leisure services in a different way, and I think it's going to be really important for the auditors to give assurances around what that difference looks like. So yes, I think there is a feed from one to the other.
Thanks a lot, and yeah, very comprehensive list. Very, very busy list, though. I've got three little things I just want to ask you about. One is about the issue of co-production, which is a very strong value which has been put out by the council and which has been challenging. So it is something that comes up regularly with residents, and so somewhere in there I think that there needs to be a look at co-production and how that is being delivered and how it's being monitored and the success of that. just because I think it's there as a gift to people and it hasn't, I don't think it's landed that well at the moment. So that's number one. The second one, in terms of placemaking and housing, I don't know where it would come into it, but the whole issue about the private rented sector and licensing is something which is really problematic because of the amount of resources you have to put into it. And yeah, I just think a report on that somewhere would be really useful. I think we all thought there was going to be a bit of magic dust sprinkled with the new licensing, and there clearly isn't any. It's clearly not. So, not that I don't think people are doing it, but just wonder about the resources and the cost benefit of it. And the final thing I wanted to ask about was I don't know whether we have, what kind of remit we have over planning, and whether we do have any or not, and whether you ever do an audit of planning. But I know there's been quite a few quite contentious decisions made, and I just wondered if there's an opportunity for us to look at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Let's start with the last one first, if I may. So yes, planning is on the audit plan for next year, and that will review the governance arrangements. So that's on page 147 now.
Okay. Sorry, yeah. Oh yes, it is. Sorry, I missed that. Yeah, great. Thank you.
So we have got an audit this year, so as part of this year's current plan, to carry out a review of how we are managing the private sector leasing arrangement.
Yeah.
Well, I'll be reporting back to the committee in July. The first one is a really interesting point, though, because the plan doesn't capture co-production. And I don't think we've done any specific audit this year or more recently that captures that particular element of risk. So let me reflect on that, if I may, please. And then see what we can do about that.
Thanks.
I agree. It's very complex. I don't know how you're going to do it. If you don't mind going through the various bits of it, on page 105, you've got sickness management. I guess, I mean, you know, I'm sure that there's reasons for it. But for me, I think temporary staffing, the use of temporary staffing, all that kind of value is there. And I know that's become a really serious commitment to try and reduce the level of temporary staffing that we are deploying into the organisation. So we're trying to look at that as an area that's strong. So I just wondered about including that somewhere. I don't expect you to do a massive piece of work, because I think, you know, it's a very mobile area, I imagine. But I just wondered about that rather than sickness. I don't know. Sickness, because I don't know anything about it and the levels of sickness we have in the organisation. I think on housing and business, it's really great to see this list. It's just so nice. Because I think now that homes and housing are in-house, you can actually understand some of what's going on there. So it'd be really lovely that you're looking at it. I wanted to include the lettings process. Do you remember when we had? It's not even minuted well. It's not documented well. And what decision, why, and who makes it? Even none of that process is there. And I worry a little bit about, and it's the same staff for the same years with so many, you know, and I just worry a little bit about it. And I just haven't let go of that area. So I'd quite like to include lettings and the process. Just two more, please. The other area that came up was shelter schemes. And I think, because I think it's a really, I listen to my colleagues and it's a very difficult area at the moment and what's happening in shelter schemes, but I'm not able to give you guidance on what exactly we should be looking at. I know there's issues about what age group people are in, what's the reasons for them being there in the first place, how they landed there, are they DPS checked before they land there, or is that ignored? You know, there's a whole series of things that I have worries about, and I think because there's so much going on in our shelter schemes, I just worry that we've left it. We were supposed to get the information back, and we never got it from the key officers. So I just wondered a bit if you could think about what exactly can we look at it. I'm sorry to ask you, I know you've got enough on your plate, so sorry about that. these three areas that bother me really. On Ken's audits and still house, I do feel, I don't know why you got that time on it, but personally, having met with him recently, I felt like we were better in control. And I think it's the level of officers we have at the moment there. Both, and there seems to be a cabinet member as well, and we had a lovely meeting with them. And I kind of feel like much more confident about it than I did in the past. So in a way, you know, there's something for you to think about. And that's it, really, I think. Yeah, that's it. Really.
Can I just also add in relation to Councillor Allen's bit about shared accommodations? Councillor Allen has set out some criteria. It is worthwhile to know if there's any property shared accommodations not of that. Yeah.
Should I start with that first then?
Yeah, and then yeah.
So we have audited shared scheme this year. So I'm bringing that paper to the findings of that audit. I'm not sure that is whether your specific risk is captured in that, so whether we're utilising that or the accommodation we have fully. And let me just double check, and if I can drop you an
to understand, because it is, you know, if they are left empty, you know, why is it empty? How, you know, what's the reason? How we can actually make more use of it, you know, for the residents. That would be really helpful. So okay.
You would have definitely definitely. Kenneth Robbins, I'm really pleased you said what you said, Councillor, because that is a significant area of spend for us. So the regeneration of that particular block is going to be quite large, quite big, and that's the reason I sort of, just to get some assurances that we're doing what we need to do there. Lettings process, that is planned for this year, so I'll be bringing that to you as well. I think members have previously raised that risk with me, and that to the plan. We'll be looking at that, but that's already done. Sickness management. So our sickness, longer term sickness, let's have pick up a little bit. And hence the need to just check that we've got all the right processes for the management of our staff in that space. We have done a broader review of workforce planning. That was done this year or last year. If I can track that down, I'll share the findings of that with colleagues. Because I think we've completed that broader review. But this one is much more specific about just making sure that we are keeping a good level of control around sickness and sickness management. It's the longer term sickness and more short term sickness. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brennan. Yes.
So, firstly, I'm probably agreeing with Councillor Army quite a lot. I'm very pleased that you've got the process to let property following up on delivery of the housing improvement plan and housing plans on the housing list. And if I've understood it right, you might be giving us a starting point, a bit of information about it before you do this, because it's nice to sort of be able to know where we're coming from, going to, you know, FaceTime. So I'm looking forward to getting that. It's quite exciting. And then this other thing, which is sickness management, but I know this is probably just my viewpoint. But I rather agree that it's more interesting for us to check the use of agencies or such like, because though we're losing money, right? In a sense that is a money thing. And the sickness thing, it seems to me a little bit like it's, most people probably are genuinely sick, you know, this bit seems a bit sort of personal, you know, whereas I would rather do the money thing, go for the money, that's just my...
Part of the risks around a sickness audit though are to do with making sure that as an employer we're fulfilling our duty of care to those people who are genuinely on long-term sick, so yeah, not just.
And your point about agency staff is well made too, because I think that's, keep saying this, I think we've audited that recently as well.
there's been some work in that space around the sort of
I think
management of the contract.
That's it, that was
and
it.
how it
Yes.
works.
So about 9 months ago, so I think we did a review of how well we manage the matrix contract, which is the route by which we secure agency and staff. I suspect you're thinking about how we use these, so I will take that away as well.
Yes. Thanks, Ganesh. I just want to follow up on the discussion we had around the risk assessment work that is being done in the council. That the future will inform on these plans, because I'm hearing all the councillors talk about what's been included, what hasn't been included. So I guess the results of the risk assessment work would be a good one source of information of what the risk profile of the council is and how it informs on the internal audit plan, and then what the results of the internal plan talks back to that risk assessment. So just an update on that, please.
Thank you, yes. So Appendix 4, just page 165. What that's, sorry, it is a slightly very tiny, but essentially what that's trying to do is recognize what the council's risks are, and there are 18 risks listed there, and it's mapping against those risks where there is audit work to try to provide assurance around the management of those risks, which I think is what Riaz might be pointing towards. Notwithstanding that, though, I think there is another piece of work which is well timed, which is that we need to make sure that we are continually looking at our risk management and trying to make sure we get the best from that process. So with that in mind, we asked Zurich to do that. I'm afraid there's a bit of a delay in getting all of this done. And by all of this, I mean arranging the workshops to have that session, because organizationally we've been really busy with the budget setting, the process. So the departmental management teams just haven't had that space to sit and reconsider or invite Zurich to think about the risk to be challenged by Zurich. But that is something that we definitely want to do, because we want to get that this management process
That's important. Just one last question, specifically on the procurement audit information. Does that include some of the work that has been done now?
It does. So I've got specific audits in that phase. Okay, so it's on page 948, under contracts and procurement audit, implementation of the new procurement model. That is the operating model for the procurement team. And then we've got operating model, the new source to pay application review. As I say that, though, I look at the number of days and I think I might be a bit light on the days. So I have got some contingency days which are available to consider that, plus some of the suggestions that members have made, so we can try to put in more time. Ultimately, I'll be honest, that is such an important part of our venture for next year, that if I have to reassign some of the duties, I'd have to do that.
I just wanted to add my voice to request audit on the temp staff or agency staff, because I think it's quite consistent and it's important. And if I can offer a trade-off, I see that we have 12 days on management of garages. So I was quite surprised to see that, because it's one of the highest number of days, so we have so many garages. So maybe there could be some kind of there.
There is something in the background there, it is a lot of days, but there are some of the work that the anti-fraud team has done around garages points to a level of weakness in governance that is unacceptable. And so I think we review that area and hence the increase in days. But the other thing that you said still resonates, and I will consider that. Yeah.
I've got just a small question. So when I look at the audit plan, so the last total of days is 800 people days. So that's around over 2 years. And there's a comment that you have a plan. Is that right? Is that right? Yeah. Okay. That's the timeline.
So in terms of the number of days, I'm given a budget. That's if I expend this many days.
Okay.
But I have been to COT and the chief executive sort of asked me the question whether that number of days is enough, and whether there needs to be any movement in considering what other London boroughs do. And I have got some assurances from him that if I need to move the days a bit, there is a need for that.
So days are sufficient for you to conduct your audit?
Yes, as it is, yes.
As it is. Okay.
But if there is any change, which can happen, over next year, then there is flexibility.
Okay, so you've got that kind of maneuver space.
That's right.
Okay, thank you so much. So, the recommendation for this report is that the audit committee reviews and approves the updated annual internal audit strategy plan for 24-25, Appendix A, internal audit charter, Appendix B, and notes the internal audit protocol, Appendix C, and the assurance risk map, Appendix D. Thanks so much. So we move on to the item 13, internal audit progress report 23-24.
Thank you, Chair. So this is my usual report to you. And it sort of sets out the work that the internal audit team have done since the last meeting. The key points I'd like to bring to your attention are, in terms of the performance of the audit team, they are slightly behind where they would wish to be at the end of January. And I suspect what that means is that they will not be able to finish their work completely by the end of March. I suspect we'll go into April and we'll finish the work in April. That in itself shouldn't be too problematic, because I'm planning to bring a paper that summarizes all of the audit work in July. So as long as they finish all the work, we should be okay with that. But they are slightly behind. And then in terms of the actual work itself, just one small correction. I indicated in my report that there were 15 pieces of work completed. I've done a count of 2, so actually 13 pieces completed in that period. And of the 13, there were 3 areas which were assigned either nil assurance or release assurance. The nil assurance was assigned to the delivery of leisure services, I referred to earlier. And then we had release assurance for the Pendarren House audit and the purchase of treatments. And perhaps just going into a bit more detail about those 3 areas. Just to say that there is an appendix attached to your paper, and that's on page 175. And that just sets out the status of all the audits that the SARS have at the moment and the various stages that they're at.
I'll ask a question whilst members observe the. So, just going back to the nil assurance in relation to leisure services, if you can just provide how that's going to work out, because this is relationship of council services now, and do we have resources in place in order to carry out the activities that we need to, because it's a service that's been lifted and shifted, and what's the plan going forward to make sure that, because it has a relevant assurance in terms of providing service to our residents. So that's one. Second one is about the Pendarren House. So I think every child in Haringey, including myself, has visited Pendarren House. So at the moment it's limited assurance. I know there has been changes in relation to the head of Pendarren. In the meantime, since it has limited assurance, does that mean that the Pendarren House is no longer used for children from Haringey to visit for the outdoor activities. So although your report suggests that they have accepted the recommendation and they will be some point by May 2024, the recommendations will be implemented. So if you can just give us a bit more insight on that. And purchase of the care plans and limited assurance, and that's for April 2024. So those are the three questions that I have.
Yeah. So just perhaps by way of background, can I just say a little bit about each of those 3 areas and then respond specifically to your questions. So yeah, delivery of leisure services. This area was assigned nil assurance because there were significant deficiencies in how we were managing the fusion arrangement. The main deficiencies were that the contract management process identified that there were deficiencies. But unfortunately, having identified those deficiencies, the escalation hadn't been applied at the time of the audit. Clearly, things have moved on now, and notices have been served. But at that time, those instances of failings didn't really lead to any performance issue or any penalties. Under the contract, there are some stipulations around what is expected of the contractor, and in a number of areas, the contractor hasn't fulfilled them. So there is a need for a service plan, and the service plan needs to set out key performance indicators. That wasn't completed at the time of the audit. There had been a health and safety review by an external company, which had identified a number of issues, and those issues were then flagged as part of an improvement program, but actually those weren't being taken forward and dealt with either. So what that meant was that as a council we were exposed to a number of health and safety risks, delivery risks, contract risks, and hence the nil assurance. Which brings nicely me to the point around what do we do. The audits that we have planned for next year are essentially to support the organisation's move toward bringing these services back in-house. A lot of these services the council has not won for many, many years. So they will present a new challenge and a new way of operating that we haven't experienced before. And that in itself brings new risks. So what we're trying to do from the audit side is to support the service in putting in place the right governance for the management of leisure services going forward. It is a very challenging timescale. We are going to have, they're going to bring the services back in-house by the start of October. So we haven't got very long. I know organisation, key people have been appointed to drive the process, but nevertheless, I think it's going to be quite a challenge. On Pendarren, this was actually a review that was requested by the service. Pendarren has been closed for a while, and there was a change in management locally at Pendarren. A long-standing manager, 17 years, left, and a new person came in, and management asked for a review to be done. And that review identified, again, a number of gaps. The most notable gaps were around the need for making sure that staff were trained around safeguarding and safeguarding arrangements. Some members of staff had been trained, but not all. There was a need for maintaining a proper risk log of all the activities that go on at the centre, and that wasn't as complete as it should have been. There was a need to appoint a deputy child protection lead. They had the child protection lead, but not the deputy, and that's quite important. So that was noted as a weakness. And key performance indicators to monitor and manage the operations of Pendarren, they weren't robust enough. So for those reasons, the audit was assigned limited assurance. The centre is still open. A lot of the recommendations have actually been implemented. As the auditors were identifying the issues and feeding it back to management were responding to them. But I think it's a point well made, and I'll go back to the service and seek an update on where we are with all those recommendations, and perhaps circulate the update to
the members. Right. Councillor Mason, thank you.
Thanks. Thanks a lot for this. And it is the thread through them seems to me to be about how we as a council are managing these external contracts, because it's really disappointing to see the Pendarren. My kids went to Pendarren, I wasn't here, but my kids did, and you know, it's a really fantastic experience for them. But it makes me shiver to think about not having completed safeguarding. That is so, and Pendarren is a place where there are boys and girls together, and that those children might not be protected, often very vulnerable children. Sorry to go on about it, but that really makes me really concerned. So yes, and I hear you when you say about those in place. How do we assure ourselves that they will continue to be in place? Because it's a management issue for Haringey rather than internal to Pendarren, isn't it? How does Haringey Council assure itself? And the same with the leisure services. I'm not very surprised, and there's no action plan to schedule and monitor remedial work. Site inspections weren't undertaken. This is all about how we manage our contracts with external providers. So I think that is something that we really need to be more reassured about as an audit committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. So just turn to the first point around Pendarren. I think our risk appetite in this area is very, very low, as exactly as you say. Yeah. So the auditors have been very picky, if you like, in the sense of the level of control that we wish to see. And management have been acting very fast in terms of responding to some of these. So I'm more reassured that steps are being taken to deal with the specific issues. And the specific point about how do we make sure that they are going to be continued in future, that is dealt with by that need for the key performance indicators, where the operations of the centre are managed and reported back to the local management as well as up here, so that we are aware of what the state of play is in these areas. I think it's already taken as read that we will do a follow-up of this area and do another audit of Pendarren, just to make sure that the arrangements are robust and setting. So,
thank you.
The second point around the leisure service. I think in my last annual report, I explained that I was of the view that contract management across the organisation is not robust enough. So what we're seeing here is just one example of that. Procurement team have essentially three things to do as part of their rebirth. We heard from Barry earlier about what they're planning to do around the new system, because that's one facet. But there's also two other areas. The second area is that they need to remodel, and this has been agreed, they need to remodel the level of scrutiny they apply across the organisation. At the moment, their scrutiny is at 160,000 and above. So any spend above 160,000, there is an automatic requirement for the strategic procurement team to be engaged. And that is going to be taken down to 25. So that means a lot of our current procurement activities, which are not, that don't involve procurement, will be. And I think that will allow the organisation a greater level of oversight, answering some of the specific questions that were raised around single tenders, but also improve contract management. And the third facet is training. We can put all these systems in place locally and design how we think they're going to be working, but they're going to be useless if our staff and our officers don't know how to use them and are not properly trained to be able to do some of the things they're required to do, specifically around contract management. So I think there will have to be another layer specifically around how the organisation is going to be brought to comply with what we think is the right way of doing procurement of the organisation. So I think that's three things.
With respect, as the issue of having the right KPIs in place, driving the outcomes is key as well, isn't it? Thank you.
Questions from this item? Thank you. Oh, sorry.
But they're very similar, so I'll be quick.
I have asked.
So,
questions.
First point again, the delivery of the leisure services, it's not a one-off, so it might be an indication on how the contracts are managed, so I want to highlight that point as well. And I also want to understand exactly what is the monitoring model, because for instance, in all these years, we have received a lot of complaints from residents about the leisure services and how they were managed. But our members' inquiries were going to not to the procurement team. So I understand that now you say that the contract management sits with the procurement team, but the responses that we were getting were from the teams, so from the reports. So, it was not, I'm not sure if the internal model assume that those sort of, because it's an indirect kind of monitoring. So if there is a link between us putting forward the feedback from residents to the specific service and this being put back to the procurement. So that's my point.
Thank you. Yeah. So I think I may have just given a slightly misleading picture. The responsibility for making sure contracts are monitored is always with services. Services are responsible for making sure they contract manage or whatever contracts they have. However, procurement, strategic procurement have a role in making sure that they define what good looks like, and they provide that good picture to services so that they can adhere to those standards and apply those standards. I think at the moment what we have is a varying degree of contract management. There are some contracts which are well managed. We do have some contracts that are really well managed, but they tend to be in areas where people are used to managing contracts all the time. So I've brought contract management reports here, which have been assigned good levels of assurance, but actually where the service doesn't fully appreciate how to manage a contract, that's where I think strategic procurement have a role in defining what that should look like and offering help and advice to manage those contracts. And also helping where, if those contracts are not going well, what are we going to do next? As opposed to services are struggling on with the same issues over and over again.
The second point about the Parliament House, it is a serious issue from a safeguarding point of view, I agree. And therefore, what I don't understand is when we say that the Parliament House is open, what does it mean exactly? Are kids going there, or you just open, as in it's operating? Because to me, because it's a serious safeguarding situation, no children should go there until all those actions have been implemented and closed.
So I think this is the point. Let me ask the service what the state of play actually is now. In fact, I can circulate that to members of this committee, and that will help inform whatever next.
That was one of my first questions. Thank you so much, Councillor. But so we note the audit coverage for the following follow-up work completed. So we'll note that report. So we move on to the item number 14, Anti-Fraud and Corruption Progress Report, quarter 3, 23-24. Is that Vanessa? Yeah. Thank you so much.
I'm Vanessa Bateman, Deputy Head of Audit and Risk Management. Our quarter 3 is here focused on the activities specifically under the Anti-Fraud and Corruption Strategy. Again, members are familiar with the format of this report. So I'm just going to highlight a few points on page 186, section 13. We talk about some changes to our risk assessment during the period It's due to sort of increased referrals and activity relating to officers with dual roles and a couple of referrals with regard to social care. Page 187, table there 15.3 shows performance against our KPIs. 13 properties were covered, which takes us to 42 year to date, and 24 rights buyers prevented, so it's 80 year to date. More info in 15.6 around the tenancy work. Referrals remain steady in this area from both the internal and external sources, and we do a mix of proactive check-in to prevent fraud as well as investigation cases where there's a clear suspicion of fraud. Page 188, 1511, talks about the Blue Badge project. Referrals have been high. It's not really unusual where we've set to target some resource in a new area. We have started to transition some of this work back to the parking enforcement team so that our resources can solely focus on the actual fraud investigations and potential prosecution cases. And 1512, just highlighting that as the year end approaches, we're focusing in on our last planned proactive project for the year, which was around temporary accommodation. 1519, page 189. So we closed in the period 3 of the 6 employee cases that were open at the start. We did have 5 new referrals in, which we accepted, but and all but 1 were closed at the end of the period, so we closed 4. 1520, page 190, just a bit about the whistleblowers there. So we ensure that all of the allegations that fall within the whistleblower policy are investigated in line with that policy. There were 5 open during the period and only 1 sat with us, which was deemed more appropriate for services and other bodies to do the others. Thank you, Chair.
Any questions?
Sorry, just a quick one about HMO licensing. I've come across a few cases now about HMOs which are not licensed, and that has prevented the tenant to be able to get an increase in their housing allowance and universal credit. So it's I'm assuming that they've just reported those under HMO licensing, but that would just remain in licence, would never come to you as fraud. Or would it?
Check, if you wouldn't mind, if you would send it to either me or Vanessa or both.
Oh, great, thank you.
We'll make sure that the appropriate.
Okay, that's lovely. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Right, so the recommendation is the audit committee is responsible for monitoring effectiveness of the policies of anti-fraud and corruption and reviewing assurance with regards to council's internal control environment and mechanism for managing fraud risk. To facilitate this, progress reports are provided on a regular basis for review and consideration by the audit committee with regards to anti-fraud and corruption. Okay. Thank you so much. So we move on to the next item, which is the item 15. And it's local code of corporate governance. Minesh, would you like to introduce your report, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is not a regular item that I report to you, because actually it's the first time in many years that we are refreshing this code. Just by way of background, as a local authority, we're not required by law to have a local code of corporate governance. But the guidance that has been issued by SIPFA suggests that that's actually a good thing to do. It's a good practice to have one. And we do have one, but it's relatively old. And what this document is trying to do is to bring the code right up to date. Having a code is a good way of showing that we are committed to the principles of good governance, and that we want to build public trust in all the work that we do. So you'll see that on page 192, there's a nice little chart there that sets out the 7 principles of what good governance looks like. And what the local code seeks to do is build, in terms of those 7 principles, the sorts of things that we would want to put in place to govern our operations across the entirety of our And I share this, excuse me, sorry, I share this local code with the community for you to endorse and for it to be taken to the full council as a means of being, if you like, the operating model, the default way in which we will carry out our activity. If it's helpful, just one more thing. To get to this point, the code has been discussed in various management committees, and more recently at the Constitutional Review meeting, where the principles have been explored and the detail of what we're planning to do further examined.
Any questions?
Just a comment, because we were mentioning co-production earlier on. So there is a section on the code actually, it's page 204, which is about engaging with the city plans and residents. I think I've seen it somewhere else as well. So then if the piece of audit will go forward, then might be also be
So that's
integrated.
co-production is probably actually embedded within the.
Absolutely. It's part of our DNA. Thank you.
Huge emphasis from the committee.
Sorry?
So that's fine.
Oh.
Yeah. More questions?
It's a very good thing.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. If there is any further questions, so the recommendation for this report is that the audit committee reviews and approves the attached local code of corporate governance attached at Appendix A. Right. Item number 16, new items of urgent business. Thank you. The date for the future meetings is likely to be in July. Thanks so much. July. Yeah. Thanks so much, everyone, for your attendance. Thank you very much, members, RAS, officers. Done. Okay.
Bye.
Hopefully next time you'll join us in person.
Absolutely.
Thank you for, yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.
So,